we have a person who has started reading not only Marathi and Gujarati, but has understood Parsi Gujarati extremely well, much better than most Parsis, and of course, Urdu, Hindi, Persian, and even Portuguese. As always, I'm going to request those in the audience to share their knowledge about some of the things Murli is going to discuss. Old print history from the Parsi Gujarati press, as well as everything to do with South Asia and particularly the western side of India. And without more ado, I'm going to hand you over to Murli. Enjoy the session. Please leave your questions in the box and we will take questions. And of course, hopefully, we will ask you questions after the program. Welcome, Murli. Thank you so much for being here. You were supposed to be here in person 2 years ago, but finally we have you on Zoom where you can't escape. So welcome long distance and please start. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kama. And thank you to Parzor Foundation, the Geo Parsi Friday Forum for having me here online. This is actually my first lecture on the internet. So in case I fumble or do something stupid, just bear with me. Can you hear me? Some feedback?
Yes, that's great. Yes, we can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So today we are going to talk about Parsi print heritage. I mean, when I say I'm doing print history, people are a little confused. I mean, what exactly is print history? I mean, as children, even students doing bachelor's and master's degrees in India are still not exposed to the concept of something called print history. Is it something worth doing? I mean, what exactly are we talking about here? So I always get these kind of questions. So I'm hoping that I can answer some of those as we go along. And the information which we got on the flyer, which said 250 years. So it's a long time to cover 250 years in less than 50 minutes. So maybe we'll be just just skipping through, so to speak. So please bear with me if you do that. So before we start, I would like to mention two names. One is Anant Kagba Priolkar, and the other is Graham Shaw, two print historians who have done a lot of work on the printing history of India as well as Bombay. Priolkar in the year 1958 wrote a book called The Printing Press in India, which was supposed to be an anniversary book for the 400th anniversary of the coming of print in India, which happened in 1556. And Dr. Graham Shaw, who is, I think, with us here, hi Graham, is actually the leading print historian of India. And both of them have done a lot of work on Parsi print history as such and printing history in Bombay and Western India. So I'll be just using their work, building on them. And I'm really grateful to both of them, as well as specifically to Graham, who's here and has always been a constant support. And before we go along, I'd just like to do a quick review of print in India. I mean, print in India came in the 1550s accidentally from London to Bombay, to Goa, sorry. And it stayed there. A printing press going towards Ethiopia first landed in Goa, and it just stayed here. And that's how a printing press first came to India. And if you look at the conventional history of print, many of you would have heard of Johannes Gutenberg, his Bible, and the 1450s in Mainz in Germany. But if you really dig a little deeper, you will find that printing has got a longer heritage than 1450. You have printing happening in China. China is now considered the motherland of printing. And you have printing happening from maybe the 5th or the 6th century. You got specimens from the 8th century, from Japan, from China, from Korea, even movable type. You have specimens from Korea from the 13th or 14th century. So there is a long history of printing, and India has sort of comes in very late into printing. Now, if you look at specifically Bombay, I mean, and Western India. I mean, as many of you know, Bombay was taken over by the East India Company in the 1660s from the Portuguese, and they already had a factory or a base in Surat, and Bombay was one more place in where they could actually set up base. So in about the year 1670, you find a gentleman called Bhimji Parekh. Bhimji Parekh was perhaps the richest man in Western India in the 1670s. He was the Nagar Seth of Surat, which in those days meant that he was the big boss of the trading community there, and he was also the chief broker of the English East India Company. That means he handled all their affairs, and he is the person who wrote to London via the Surat officials asking for a printing press. I mean, we still don't know much about what kind of exposure he must have had to printing to ask for a printing press. And he was very clear that he didn't want to print in English. He wanted to print in the characters of India, the scripts of India. And he offered to pay the money, whatever it costs, to get the printing press, and also for a printer, and also for somebody who would also be able to cast the letters or in the local script, which must have been Gujarati in the 1670s, or maybe Devanagari for Sanskrit. So the East India Company sent a press. It landed in 1674, and the gentleman who came along with the press, the printer Henry Hills, was an accomplished printer, but he had no clue about how to cast type, which was required for printing in the local texts. So Bhimji was, of course, disappointed, and he tried to get it manufactured locally, but he didn't succeed. And very soon we find that the printer Henry Hills returns back to London in 1679, and after that nothing is heard of the press, and that's where it stood until in the year 1850s, 1855, December 1855, the editor of the Bombay Times suddenly published a news which said that he had discovered a 32-page booklet titled "The Calendar of Our Lord in the year 1780," printed in Bombay. So that's the first sort of tangible information you had that there was printing in Bombay in the 18th century, printed in Bombay by a gentleman called Rustamji Kerasaji. That's what he spelled it as. Maybe Kerasaji was Kershasji, and it was printed in the bazaar. The bazaar is, I guess, the area which is now called the Bazar Gate Street, the local bazaar of Bombay, within the fort of Bombay. So that was the first time you had a hint that printing had happened in Bombay in the 18th century, 1780 to be precise. Maybe the printing press was set up in 1779 so that the calendar could be released in January of 1780. So that was the first time you had a link to printing in Bombay before 1800, and almost 100. But for some reasons unknown, the editor George Buse managed to lose the book, and we have never seen it, and nobody else other than him has seen that book apparently. And very soon after that, you had a much more vibrant infrastructure for printing. You find newspapers coming in the 1790s, the Bombay Herald, the Bombay Gazette, and then the Bombay Courier. But before that, you find that the Bombay Herald person, James Douglas Richardson, who was the editor and proprietor of the Bombay Herald, actually acquired the press from a person called Prestonji Bowmanji. Many of you here might have heard of the Wadia family, who's a shipbuilding family, which sort of built ships for the English in Bombay. So Prestonji Bowmanji was a grandson of the founder of that family, Lauji, and he was also one of the richest men in Bombay at that time. So apparently he had a printing press, which he sold to the proprietor of the Bombay Herald. So clearly you have another involvement of the Parsis in the press. So when did he acquire that press? I mean, I don't know. I found out this information in the records of the Bombay Mayor's Court, where he filed a case against Richardson for not paying the money which was supposed to pay for the printing press. So this are all just, you have to piece this history through little bits and pieces you discover from here and there. And then there is a gentleman called James Todd, who had a printing press in the 1770s. And one specimen from that printing press was discovered in the binding of an old book, an advertising bill from 1772. So you have James Todd printing in 1772. You have Rustamji Kershasji printing in 1779, 1780. and you have Fardunji Bomanji owning a press in 1790. So clearly, from the evidence at hand, it seems it's the same press which changed hands at some point of time, and finally it ended up as the Bombay Herald press. But even inspired, and then the Bombay Herald made room for the Bombay Gazette and the Bombay Courier in 1792, which became the leading paper of Bombay for almost the next 50 years. So here's a view of the Bombay Courier, and this is the Bombay Courier from 1796. This is from the National Archives in Calcutta, this newspaper. So for about 5 years, it was printing in English, and suddenly on November 12, 1796, you have something in Gujarati, or something which looks like Gujarati. And let me just sort of zoom into that and sort of read it out for you. एक खबर शर्वे ने जाहिर थाय जे गुजराती छापवाना हरफ मुबे बहरामे थता नरसंगजीए मुंबईना दरमियाનમાં બનાવીને મિસ્ટર એશબર્ન સાહેબની કોરિયર ઓફિસમાં છાપવાનું કારખાનું કાઢેલું છે તે વાસ્તે તમામ લોકોને ખબર કરીએ જો હવે પછી તમામ ગુજરાતી છાપવાનું કામ કોરિયર ઓફિસમાં છપાશે જેમ કે અંગ્રેજી છાપે છે તે પ્રમાણે સંવત 1853 ના કાર્તિક સુદ 11 વારે ગરુવે that is Tariq 10 November 1796. In case you didn't understand that, there is a very easy translation in English, which follows. Here it is, which says that a font of types in the Banyan or Gujarat character, having been invented and cast by Behramji Gigi Boy and Narsangi Kawasji and added to the printing stock of the Bombay Courier office, the public are hereby informed that business will hereafter be executed in this type upon the same terms as in the English character. This was a pretty much a historic event. I mean, where you have a font of Indian script prepared by an Indian and without any motivation. I mean, the editor of the Bombay Courier, William Ashburner, wrote an editorial on this. Let me just focus into the editorial, which says, in presenting the public with specimen of types in Gujarat character which appear in the present paper, it would be doing injustice to merit of a very superior kind, not to say a few words in behalf of the man to whom the credit of the types is due. These types owe their invention and foundry to a Mobaid or priest of the Parsi caste, who from his own impulse, and this is important, undertook the task whose genius, almost unassisted, suggested the principles of the manufacture and whose indefatigable industry has surmounted 1,000 obstacles that for 3 years and a half have opposed his success. With such as have paid any attention to the Parsi character, it will of itself convey no small degree of panegyric that a man of this caste should undertake such a speculation, but for this to abandon a profession which maintained him with competency and comfort, to relinquish all pecuniary views but such as were barely necessary for his support, to brave all the derision and ridicule which ignorance and prejudice bestow upon untried pursuits, bespeaks a mind of superior class, for such as we apprehend are the claims to admiration of Behramji Gigi Boy. So you have a person here whose name is specifically mentioned. Typically, the European press would just not mention Indian names. So so that's a very clearly an indication that there's something special happening here. Let's just go back to the script here. I mean, you find that it's Gujarati, but it's got anchor line on top like Devanagari. There's hardly any space between words, but you've got a little dagger here between the words to signify that it's a new word starting there, and then you don't have any full stops, but you have a little dund, which is a sort of a Sanskrit dund which has been used to sort of make a full stop. So Behramji was experimenting. He was trying to find new ways to sort of how to sort of encapsulate a completely different script from English into the art of the type foundry. So this was a major achievement, and it happened exactly 225 years ago. I mean, that's the reason why I requested Dr. Kama that we do this lecture in November, because I want to propose that this is something worth celebrating. 225 years of the Gujarati script made by an Indian without any assistance on his own initiative is something which we all, it's not just Parsi, which we all need to celebrate. And that is something which I want to propose in this forum as something which we celebrate not just this year, and hopefully which is something which becomes a sort of a milestone for Indian print. Maybe November 10th as the Indian Day of Print. So this is something which I wanted to share on this in the same month. And after having produced this font, it immediately began to be used in the Courier newspaper for advertisements, for printing government notices. But Behramji was very clear how he wanted to use it himself, and that was to print a text of the Avesta in this font. Just like Gutenberg printed the Bible, Behramji printed the Avesta in the following year, 1798, in this Gujarati script, so that his fellow co-religionists could read what was being said in that script, because many of the people, Parsis, no longer knew how to read it. So here's the title page of that book, which again I'll read out to you. I mean, it's just a matter of curiosity here. A kitab khurde avasthani yani nyayesh tata yesh tata baz ane namaskarni जे काई के बेहदीनों ने दीन न फरमान परमाणे जरूरियात फरज छे ते मोबेद बहरामे मोटा दस्तूरों ने लखेली किताब मदेती उतारी ते बंदरे Mumbai 1167, that is 1798 in the Christian era. So this is the book which was first published in Gujarati. It's actually not a Gujarati book, it's actually a book in Gujarati script, but in the old language of the Avesta. And but this was the first book. So what happened to Behramji after that? I mean, he died in 1804, but before that he did two more important things. The British had taken over the province of Kerala in the 1790s in some one way or the other from Tipu Sultan, and they needed a font in Malayalam. Who better to go to than to Behramji Jiji Boy? So in the year 1799, without knowing the language, presumably, he managed to cast a font of Malayalam type, which is this one. This is the first letter which he addresses to the governor, Jonathan Duncan, on 27th February 1799, stating that he has finished the script and he's waiting for further orders. So, and you can see his name here, which says, "Your Honor's most obedient and most humble servant, Behramji Jiji Boy, from the Courier Press." So this is what he did. And the same year, he also cast a font for Marathi, which was written in the Modi script. So he actually did three scripts, the types for three scripts, which is a major achievement for somebody who had no background in printing at all. And to be able to cast and then to print and then to print a book and then to run a separate business within the Courier Press for native language printing was a major achievement. But sadly, it was all forgotten, not just by the Parsis, but by everybody. Even in the 1850s, if you open the newspapers of the Ras Goftar, you do find mention of Behramji Jiji Boy and his font, and even this book, which is only one copy was available in Bombay, and they commented that the script, the beauty of the script is still better than what they were using in the 1850s, the font. But by 1900, when the Parsi Prakash was being compiled, they had completely forgotten about Behramji Jiji Boy and his achievements and his first book of Khode Avasta. But they at least remembered the contributions of another man whose sort of image or photograph or some of a painting, Mobed Fardunji Mardabanji, which is available to us here. So this happened about 10 years after Behramji died in 1804. You had another Mobed, that's another Parsi priest venturing into printing. Mobed Fardunji was a highly educated man. He knew Persian, he knew Gujarati, he knew Sanskrit, and perhaps he knew the religious scriptural languages of Zoroastrianism also. And he had come to Bombay from his native village in Navsari, and he had set up a book binding shop in 1808, and he was binding books for private individuals, for the Literary Society of Bombay. And by 1812, he also seemed to have been bitten by the printing bug. I mean, he realized that there is an opportunity here, and he wanted to do printing in Gujarati, but again, he had the same problem as Behramji, which is a font of Gujarati type. No problem, he again reinvented the wheel. He cast his own types in Gujarati, And by 1814, he was printing pamphlets and little booklets and even a calendar. So the first calendar, or the Panchang, which he printed in 1814, is a non-stop run of 207 years now. For the last 207 years, it's been printed every year. And I think in this November, it must have been the 208th edition of the Panchang, which was printed. But more than the Panchang, the first major book which he printed was something which was called Dabistan Kitab. This was a major venture for by any standards, almost 800 pages long, and in a font which had been made by him. You can see the name of the book here, Dabistan Kitab, and it was printed in the year 1815. And Fardunji did it almost single-handedly. He translated the book from Persian into Gujarati. He cast the types. He designed the book. I mean, there were so many things he had to sort of sell the book to an audience which had never read a book before, printed book before. He had to explain them what were page numbers. He had to explain them what was running titles, punctuation marks, how to read things within brackets, what are proper nouns, all kinds of basic stuff which we take for granted now. He had to explain all of them. And instead of a dagger between the words, he was using dots now. And if I just quickly read the title here, Shri Pak Hormzad Di Madad, that is the invocation to the Lord here in 3 languages, in 3 scripts, in Persian, in Zand, and in Gujarati. And the title of the book, in Dabistan Kitab Li Talim Pehle, Irani Lokona Mazhab Na Farsi Mati Gujarati Karine Chhati Che. That is translated from Persian into Gujarati, about a book about the religions of Iran called Dabistan. So this was a major achievement. But even more importantly, this was the first book in Gujarati, as well as the first book to have illustrations also. It had illustrations of books of the 7 days of the week. You can see here Shri Mangalni Murti. So there were 7 illustrations of the 7 days of the week. This is Shri Mangal. And this is again from the original manuscript in which he had, from which he had translated. The illustrations were in it. And he printed them, had them stuck onto the, I think this was all carved in wood and then printed and then hand colored for each book. So you can see some stray paint which has sort of gathered out here. And so this book heralded a new era for printing in Gujarati. This was the first Gujarati book. As such, there was one before this called Faladish, but that is a very small book. But this was the first proper Gujarati book, and Fardunji inaugurated a new era of printing in Gujarati, which has now continued for non-stop for almost 206 years. And Fardunji himself had a career of 35 odd years in which he printed 50 odd books, many of them either written, translated, compiled, edited, corrected by him. He was a bookman par excellence. And many of you know about his Bombay Samachar, which he founded, the first Gujarati newspaper to be founded in 1822, the 1st of July. The following year, it will complete 200 years. Another occasion to celebrate Indian print, Parsi print heritage, and I hope we do something to celebrate that. When it was 150 years in 1972, the Samachar Press had a very beautiful book, memorial book on the press, on the newspaper. I wonder what they're planning this year. After the success of Fardunji Madhubanji and his printing press, a few more printing presses came into existence in Bombay. One was the Akbar press by Fardunji Dorabji, another Parsi priest, and he was a person. I mean, we know the first Gujarati newspaper, but the second Gujarati newspaper, the Akbar Kabisa from 1827, is completely forgotten. And Fardunji Dorabji was a person who first printed the first. Not only to do the second Gujarati newspaper, he was a person to do the first Persian newspaper from Bombay, the Akbar newspaper from 1825. And he was the first person to print a Marathi newspaper, the Mumbapur Vartaman, in 1829. So here you have a man who produced 3 newspapers, not very successfully, I must say, but he did have the courage to do 3 newspapers in 3 different languages. And there's almost nothing known about him. As we go along, I'll share one more image of his work. But before that, in the 1820s, the Parsi community was sort of, enmeshed in a religious controversy about about the introduction of a month into the Parsi, a month called the Kabisa into the Parsi religious year. And that produced a controversy which sort of, fueled the print industry like nothing before it. In 15 years, approximately 40,000 rupees worth of printing was done by the Parsis in two factions to sort of support or negate the introduction of a leap year. So here's the first book which came out from Surat, from the Surat Mission Press, by a gentleman called Aspandiarji Kamdinji of Bharuch, who sort of wrote a book in Gujarati. This is the English title of the Gujarati book, which is a historical account of the ancient leap year of the Parsis. And this book, and about 15 or 20 of them in the next 10 years, which sort of literally catapulted the Parsi print industry, which gave a major boost to it. I mean, you had the Jame Jamshed Press, which was founded because of this controversy by the Shahanshai sect headed by Jamshedji Jiji Boy. This is a print from the Akbar Press, again to do with the same controversy, Kitabe Korhe Vehjik, in lithography. One of the first early examples of lithography from Bombay. Lithography was a printing technique invented in the 1790s by Alois Steinfelder, which obviated the need for printing types, which is the metal printing types which imprinted print. This was a chemical printing process which was used to print a sort of a printed image, which was sort of which was set in stone in a way. The lithography, which basically printing from stone. So one of the early examples of printing from that era. By 1832, 10 years after he started the printing, the Bombay Samachar, Fardunji Mardabanji had to go into exile in Daman. And in Daman, he started yet another printing press called the Daman Gujarati Chapkhana, and he produced about 10-15 books from there. But in the year 1842, he sent his three young sons to come back to Bombay and set up a press called the Daftar Ashkara Press, which was set up in the year 1842. This is the first book to be printed from the Daftar Ashkara Press, again in type, Gujarati type, called Makulate Behmani, another Parsi religious book written by Mullah Qaus bin Rustam. And you can see this book is printed in Shri Mumbai Madhe Kavasji Fardunji, that is the son of Fardunji Mardabanji. Shri Mumbai Madhe Kavasji Fardunji, Daftar Ashkara na Chapkhana ma Chapiye Che, Sane 1842 Eastwi. So this was the inauguration of a printing press which dominated printing in Bombay for the next 70 years. Daftar Ashkara, print near the bazaar, which is near the Horniman Circle now, and it sort of dominated printing in Gujarati, in English also, and to some extent in Persian and in Zand, which is the Parsi, which is the language of the scriptures. And for the next 70 years, it continued to make new innovations, new scripts, new typefaces, and new innovations in bookmaking. But before we go on to that period, we need to again go back to the 1840s when the first Gujarati magazine was started. It was called the Vidya Sagar. This is the cover for the first volume from September 1st, 1840 to December 1841, and printed in the Jame Jamshed Press. As I mentioned earlier, Jame Jamshed Press was started in the year 1829 by Pestanji Manekji, who was a sort of the protege of Jamshedji Jiji Boy, and he started the press. And this Vidyasagar magazine was printed there, edited by another very important person in not just in printing but also in Parsi social life as well as Bombay political life, Nauroji Fardunji. There is a street named after him in Palava now, and he edited this magazine. He was a pretty young man when this magazine was started, and for the next 4 years he edited and printed this magazine, and it sort of set standards for printing not just Gujarati but also Marathi and Urdu, how to print magazines, how to write articles, how to edit magazines. All of these were new things, and all of these were the guidepost was Vidyasagar. And the next magazine, again from Jame Jamshed Chapkhana, was a religious magazine called Rehnumai Jarthosti from, again, 1842, the first July 1842, the first volume, and the first issue was printed, edited by Behdi Pestanji Manekji, who was the proprietor as well as the printer of the Jame Jamshed Press. So this continued for 3 years. So these were the first magazines to be printed in Gujarati, coincidentally by Parsis, and then they were taken over. This is a stray image which I'm showing you here, not printing by Parsis, but printing of Parsis. You can see the Bombay coastline here, the Bombay fort, the ramparts maybe, and here you can see three Parsis who are sort of offering their evening prayers, maybe facing the sun, and on the sea coast, very common sight in those days. This is a lithograph done by Leon Gonzalez from 1826. So you can see it's one of the earliest lithographic prints, sets of prints from Bombay. So what we have done right now is a quick survey of printing from the 1790s to the 1840s with a Parsi focus. And you can say that until the 1840s, Gujarati printing was synonymous with the Parsis. You did have textbooks being printed in the Courier press, which was printed by the government. You did have stray books printed by Gujarati Hindus and Gujarati Jains in Bombay. But there was no printing in Gujarat until 1848 itself. So almost all of the printing was by the Parsis in Gujarati, and Gujarati, as many of you, especially the Parsis, would know, was the primary language of the Parsis well into the 1950s and 60s. Now it's almost a lost skill. Maybe a few people can speak it fluently. A lot of people maybe can read it too, but it's really no longer the lingua franca of the Parsis, which is, I think, a big loss. And I think one way to retrieve history for the Parsis and for even others would be able to read and sort of gain expertise in the Gujarati script. I mean, if I can do it, I think anybody can do it. So, I mean, I have no background in Gujarati whatsoever. So if I can do it, I think it's a very easy thing to do if you just sort of set your heart to it. So let's just go back to newspapers. I think, now we come to a stage where I'm going to just sort of talk about what happened to these imprints. Many of these books have survived, maybe single copies, maybe 3 or 4 copies in some excellent in libraries. Bombay has 3 or 4 libraries. There are libraries in Navsari, Bharuch, Surat, and then the international libraries in Europe, the British Library in London, maybe a few American libraries. So copies of books have survived. But what about contemporary records of what happened in Bombay then? I mean, you had newspapers. Literally by 1850, there were 15 newspapers being published by the Parsis in Bombay. No, I mean, Bombay Samachar was the first one. This is the image of the first issue, the first page of the first issue, which was printed in the 1972 memorial book. And I'm sort of flabbergasted to say this is the only image I have seen of the Mumbai Samachar from the 19th century. 78 years of printing, but this is only the first page is what I have been seeing. I have been looking for it for the last 10 years, but I haven't been successful in seeing any other Parsi newspaper, any other Gujarati newspaper printed in Bombay from the 19th century, except for 1 or 2 exceptions, and which I'll come to very soon. So I wonder what happened to all of them. I mean, you had the Jame Jamshed, you had the Cha book, you had the Sanj Vartaman, you had the Bombay Saudagar, and many, many more newspapers, all of which have just vanished from libraries, from archives, from everywhere. In fact, the only newspaper from the 19th century for which I could find substantial holdings, and now we're coming all the way to the 1880s and 1890s, is the Kaisar-e-Hind. And the Kaisar-e-Hind was started in 1882 by Fardunji Mehta, and it was a nationalist newspaper, a supporter of the Congress from 1885. And by just pure fluke, I mean, many of you know Jahangir Patel, the editor of the Parsiana magazine. He acquired the Kaisar-e-Hind in the late 1970s. And when he sort of took possession of the premises, he went up to the attic and he saw huge piles of bound volumes of Kaisar-e-Hind going back to the very first volume, 1882. And like almost everybody else in the 1970s, he could have done a nice bit of spring cleaning by just getting rid of them. But thanks to him, thanks to his foresight, we must say, he managed to save all of these newspapers, and they have been preserved for the future generation, and they are available. Maybe I think they went off to the UK. He couldn't find a home for them in India, strangely. And they went off to the UK, and then they went off to Chicago, where they are now preserved. and they have been digitized. Unfortunately, Indian scholars who are not affiliated to important institutions can no longer access it. And I hope we can remedy this situation where we can at least access newspapers published in India. So the Kaisar-e-Hind is available. The only exception, thanks to just the foresight of one gentleman, Jahangir Patel. If you're here, Jahangir, thanks once again publicly. So you had Kaisar-e-Hind. So you have just 2 or 3 examples. The Ras Guftar, maybe a few issues available, but really nothing from the 19th century. You know, you have printed catalogs of libraries in Bombay and Navsari from the 1930s and 1940s. And there you find huge listings of newspaper volumes which are preserved in these libraries. Many of you might have heard of Ratan Marshall, a gentleman who died at the age of 100, maybe 10 years ago. He finished his doctoral thesis on Gujarati newspapers in the 1940s, and he wrote a book called Gujarati Patrakaritwano Itihas, which was published from Surat in 1950. And there he talks about all these newspapers, and he talks about where they're available, what volumes, what's in there, and he analyzes them beautifully. But come 1960, they're all gone. I mean, I don't know whether they were destroyed, whether they have been secreted away somewhere. Maybe some of you here can share some light. Maybe some of you will be able to help me out, help scholars out in general to trace these volumes which had been preserved for 150 years from the date of printing, but in the last 50 years have just vanished from common sight. Where are the Bombay Samachar issues from the Mullah Feroz Madrasa, which had 2 sets of the Bombay Samachar or the Jame Jamshed? I mean, they're all gone now. So that's something which I think celebrating and preserving print heritage, which we need to think about these issues and these volumes. Even the books, many of them are available, but many of them are guarded. You don't know where they are. But we need to have maybe a comprehensive digital library of Parsi prints from 1798 onwards. I mean, you would have literally thousands of books, but maybe a few hundred of them, if you can get them into a proper digital library, like what the British Library is doing for Bengali books, that would be a fantastic initiative which somebody can sort of champion. One is the imprints themselves, but what about the machines which printed them? What about the types which were used to print them? I mean, the situation there is very, very bad in India. All over the world, you have printing museums which are treasuring the print heritage of each country. I mean, you have countries like Greece, Egypt, which got printing after India. You have countries in Europe. You have countries like Sri Lanka, which have got printing museums. But Bombay, but India is a country which is really lagging behind in this initiative. I mean, what happened to those printing machines? I mean, just to share a few examples. I mean, here are examples from the 19th century. A very, very common press, an Albion press. I mean, there are a couple lying around in Gar. I mean, if you go to Baroda at the Sayaji University, there is an Albion press rotting in the garden, with nobody bothering about it. I mean, I wish somebody could go and sort of secure it for an Indian print museum. Here's a Colombian press, which is one of the major presses in the 19th century. One of our friends shared the image of a press of this Colombian press from St. Alsem school in Ajmer, from their school printing press. There was a Colombian press there. So that is lying in open weather in one of their maidans. So I mean, so you got some examples, but almost 99% of print equipment before 1980 has been destroyed. 1% maybe is still around somewhere. I mean, linotype machines. I mean, this is the engineering marvel. I mean, Thomas Alva Edison, when this was invented in 1880, called it the 8th wonder of the world. There were literally hundreds of linotype machines in India in the 1980s. Even Jahangir Patel, when he acquired the Kaisar-e-Hind, he had a linotype. He tried to save it, but he could save the newspapers, but he couldn't save the linotype machine. It just fell to pieces. Maybe it was cannibalized. Maybe it was just sort of dismembered wherever it was. So it just vanished. So we just don't have any of the print heritage which was used to print literally 200 years of imprints and printing heritage in India. It's all gone. So for the last 6-7 years, I've been trying to write about print history in India, trying to sort of get people to think about print as a valid subject for history. and trying to sort of get some enthusiasm going on print, saving many of the rare imprints as well as the machines on and the types with which they were printed. And sort of look at printing museums and try and see if we can set up at least one, if not many, printing museums in India. Here's, for example, the printing museum in the Bibliotheca Alexandrina, which was set up in 2005 to celebrate print history in Egypt, which was this is called the Bulak Press Museum in the library, and which was set up to sort of honor the first press print in Egypt from the 1820s. Here's the Museum Typographia from Greece, which sort of has managed to salvage a huge number of presses, printing equipment, and types from Greece. And here's an example of a very old printing press, literally a UNESCO World Heritage Site, official UNESCO World Heritage Site, the only printing museum in the world to be that, which is the Museo Plantin Moretus in Belgium, which sort of has a continuous tradition of printing from, say, from the late 1500s all the way up to the 1800s. And these are many of the old machines as well as the types you can see here have been preserved, and it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. I mean, we may not be able to replicate many of these things, but we can start small, maybe. I don't know. So my submission to all of you would be to look at print heritage as a major. It's like part of a cultural heritage, and I would submit that it's something worth celebrating. You got 225 years of Indian printing in Indian languages to celebrate. You got 200 years of the first Indian newspaper which is still surviving to talk about, to celebrate. And there are many more events which can be celebrated, and many more events which can be sort of commemorated. So we need multiple number of people to look at these things, to sort of put the energy into this and try and sort of jumpstart initiatives to build a printing museum for India. I'm happy to listen to feedback or questions about how this can be done. And if not now, you can write to me and or contact me any other way you want, and via Parzor maybe, and that will be a wonderful idea. Thank you so much for listening to me. Over to you, Shahnaz.
Thank you, Murali. I could not believe that the 45 minutes were over. I just wanted you to go on.
I could have gone on for a few more hours,
yes,
maybe.
Yes, you're more than welcome. But I have to ask you, I'm going to jump in straight away and ask you, based on that first point you made about the rape over the Gujarati lettering, because
Right.
in some of the most ancient, again, illustrated manuscripts of Parsi Gujarat, of our prayer books, one of which I know is a folio at the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, we have a picture of a Jashan ceremony, or probably a Yashna ceremony, with the Gujarati lettering with the Hindi rape on top. And I was wondering why it was in that way. So you mean it was just somebody who decided to put it in that, make that a printer who decided to do it that way?
It could well be that way. I mean, you never know. I mean, how printing influences literary culture.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at punctuation, I mean, punctuation in Indian scripts didn't exist until printing came to Indian print. So clearly, there's a two-way process where writing influences print and print influences literary tradition and culture. But of course, Gujarati was evolving even before that. So Gujarati is obviously an evolution from something which is a common parent of Gujarati and Devanagari. So the anchor line is still there in Devanagari. But Gujarati, if you see, there are examples from legal agreements from the 17th and 18th century which don't have the line already. So it's not as if Bairamji Jiji Boy suddenly decided after his first experiment, because from 1797, the next year, there is no anchor line in the Gujarati script. So it's not as if he decided that. It was already it was evolving in many ways, but I'm sure it must have there's a feedback loop going from print to writing and writing to print, surely.
Okay. And one other comment which I must make, which is typical of us Parsis, is that it's only a quarrel that made us start printing. Because one side you, of course, have You have the whole issue of the Kabise controversy, which Mayor Mistry, who's just put a point down on the chat, she talked about last week. And the second one, of course, is the massive fight over everything and anything which we do, and then we print and we publish, and it's still going on. What
So
I'm
I don't
so
know. Yeah.
amazed at, it's still going on in the Parsi press. And I'm very, very happy to hear that our genetics hasn't changed so much.
Yeah, no, I didn't want to talk about the Kabisa controversy because, there's a very, there's, I think, a non-Parsi audience here also. Plus, Meher would have covered it quite extensively in her lecture last week. So I didn't really focus on that. But yeah, that was a major, sort of a jump start to Parsi printing. Jamshedji Gigi Boy, writing in his, autobiographical book, Khula Sahib Panchayat, laments the fact that 43,000 rupees were spent on printing for a completely harmless cause. I mean, he calls it a pointless thing, pointless controversy in that book. But it was spent. I mean, 15 years it was spent. Yes, but that's the way things go. So that's the way it is.
But now I'll shut up so that the audience can have a chance. But is this Parsi Gujarati or is it Shuddh Ratan Marshal Gujarati?
Which
By
one?
the way, I have the beginning of printing with the Parsis.
See. If you look at Fardunji Marzaban, he clearly states in his book that I want to do Shuddha Gujarati.
Okay.
I am doing Shuddha Gujarati. That's what he says. But still, I mean, but unfortunately, or whatever, because they didn't have still half words. The half letters with which Indian languages are written. The prints, the early types didn't have those half words. So Pramane was written as Parmane. And for various reasons, that continued in Parsi Gujarati for a much longer period, well into the 1880s than in normal Gujarati. Because by the time Thomas Graham was doing his beautiful Gujarati scripts in the 1830s, he had solved all the problems which Behramji and Fardunji could not solve. So you had beautiful scripts coming from Bombay in the 1830s. But for some reason it persists, as I said. I mean, print influencing language. So the Parsi language. So it was Parsi Gujarati in a way, and I would say that they continued writing in it all through the 19th century.
Okay, last point is for the whole audience. We have the Ratan Marshal entire thesis, the first thesis in Gujarati at Bombay University in the Parzor archives. So if anybody wants to access it, they're more than welcome, COVID norms permitting. Now I'm going to let the questions start, and let's see, because I have not been looking at the questions. I was so fascinated by what you were saying. And we have to celebrate the 200th anniversary next year of the first surviving newspaper in Asia. Mayor Mistry is telling everybody.
Yeah, she's telling me.
Yeah. She had the line on top.
Yeah, that's true.
And then all Avastan manuscripts, I'm reading it out for the whole audience, all Avastan manuscripts from the 15th, 16th centuries with Gujarat ritual directions have an anchor line on the top. This is from Kerman Daruwala. On the middle, Madhya Kalin Gujarati script. Then there was a printing museum coming up in Pune, Pune, I don't like saying it. However, not sure of its state now. And the contribution of your heritage talk, can it come here? Murali,
I don't understand the meaning of that, but I think, yeah, I mean, I don't know about this Pune museum. I mean, if something is happening in Pune, that's wonderful, because Pune was one of the major cities of print in India, for especially Marathi printing, and the number of printing presses from say 1845 onwards was fantastic. And if there's a printing museum coming there, that's really great. And if somebody wants me to sort of pitch in, I'm more than happy to do that. So I'd like to hear more about it.
Shiva, can you tell us something more about it? Can you type it in, or if Mahtab can please.
Yes, I've asked to unmute.
Hi.
Now you're unfrozen. Mahtab, can you just unmute Shiva, please?
Yes, I've asked to unmute Shiva. I think.
Shiva? Okay, it was since 2019. It was the last time she had this information.
Okay, now I recall. Somebody had contacted me too, and I had written out a full strategy paper for the museum. That was the last I heard of it. So,
Oh,
so maybe it was the same museum, maybe it
okay.
was something else. I don't know, but I did write out an entire.
Anybody else has any specific questions, or would anybody like to please tell us if you have theater scripts, newspapers, because normally Parsis don't speak Hindi, but they have
I think we lost Shanaz.
Yes, I think we're trying to get her back. Let me just check.
The gentleman Marzban Zaiwala asks, why not have one museum in the capital of Delhi by our community? I think that's a fantastic idea. I mean, many aspects of Parsi culture can be put into that museum, and perhaps Parsi print also can be one part of one aspect of that museum. Go ahead, Trusha Ganesh, if you have a tiny question. Type it out.
Yeah, no, I got permission. Thanks. So it's just a very small thing, but when you were reading out the editorial from the Bombay Courier, I think what you were saying and what was printed on the page was slightly different. I mean, there were some words that were completely different, but there were also like spelling differences. And I was just wondering if all of that can be attributed to like a small evolution in language, or is there anything else?
No, I think I was reading out exactly what was written there.
Oh no, I mean like even spelling wise, there were a few.
Yeah, I mean, for example, the shape of the letters would have been a little different.
Okay.
So perhaps you might have had a little bit of confusion on that, but I was reading out exactly what it said. So
could I?
I'll share it again with you. How do I share now? Somebody else is sharing the screen, is it? Yeah.
No, I think you can share the screen now.
Yeah.
Here it is. Can you read it, Dusha?
Right, yeah.
So what is different from what I read in presenting? So the S is different, for example. The S is written like this. In presenting the public with the specimen of types in the Gujarat character, the C and the T are joined. There's a ligature which is still used in some fonts, which appears in the present paper. It would be doing an injustice to merit of a very superior kind not to say a few words in behalf of the man to whom the credit of these types is due. So I hope it's the same as what I read out earlier. So I think there are a few differences, small differences in the way the language is written.
Yeah, it's now that you point out that it's only like these specific things, I'm like, oh yeah, it's just these two kutty things that are different. But I was completely thrown when you were reading it the first time, and I was like, oh, you know, why the?
And even as even as Meher Mistry points out here, even the Gujarati letters, some of the letters are different. As she says, F, the fur letter is also is very different in the early Gujarati as opposed to what it is now.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
If again, sorry, I hope I'm back now. I'm from my phone. I don't know why my internet's playing up today. It's never done so before. Uh, Murali, there's just one question. Have you checked with any of the newspapers, or did Jahangir Patel check about the printing presses? Where are the printing presses of the Kaisari Hind and things like that?
Exactly. So Kaisari Hind, everything is gone. He tried to save the linotype machine, but even that also sort of either got stolen, dismembered, decayed, or whatever. So that one heirloom piece also was sort of lost. And I think all the other presses, unless we sort of go into the Mumbai Samachar archives of sorts, into the old press building and sort of start looking at and hunting, then we may not really, we have to go physically and check. Maybe they know better. I mean, I really haven't gone inside the press for a long, long time. And I think I'm sure they have the archives also. So if you can open up even just the Samachar press and the archives, that would be a wonderful start.
What about the K.R. Kama Institute? Wouldn't they have all the archives? And especially when you mentioned the Mullah Feroz contribution, the Mullah Feroz library was shifted to the K.R. Kama.
Absolutely, yeah. So exactly. So if you combine both the catalogs, there should have been 3 runs of the Mumbai Samachar from 1822 onwards inside that building. And I have asked for the last 15 years, and the librarians say that they all got washed away in some flood at some point of time. That is the official response. So maybe I believe that. So, but there is not a single issue from those newspaper catalogs, not just Bombay Samachar. The remaining, almost all the other newspapers also were there, but they're all gone now. So,
okay. Mayor Mistry is saying the Petit library has some Jame Jamshed.
Some Jame Jamshed issues, yeah. And also Mumbai Samachar also.
Okay. If anybody in this audience, I'm sorry, I can't read all your comments on my phone. Please if anybody has any knowledge or old newspapers in their old houses across Gujarat, not just Bombay and across Maharashtra, please let us know. Or if you have any theater scripts, because we do have in Parzor 100 years of Parsi Gujarati theater, not only scripts, but also handwritten theater manuscripts. So that we would love to know about it. And I have been very deeply concerned about a lot of our material, as you mentioned, going away abroad. Because once it goes away abroad, people like you and me have to spend a lot of time and money trying to access it. If you can read the next question, please, Murali. I believe there's a question for you.
Does Meherji Rana Library have any newspapers? Meher, I really have not checked there, but I don't think so. They don't, as far as I know, they don't seem to have any newspapers. So I'm not really, but I think it's worth checking again with them. And then maybe there is something sitting in some rooms. But I think mainly they are mainly books and manuscripts. For some reason, newspapers, after preserving them until the 1960s, because Ratan Marshall accesses all the newspapers and he lists them also. And even Priolkar also is using the newspapers. But after that, they just disappear. So I don't know what has happened there. So it's all gone, or maybe preserved, very well preserved, and not to be seen. I'm hoping for that. So I don't know.
And the National Archives and I know a lot of newspapers from the about 1920s are at the Teen Murti archives.
Right. So later on you have some specimens. For example, even the J.N. Petit has got 20th century newspapers, Bombay Samachar and Jame Jamshed, but nothing from the 19th century. In fact, the only place which has got 19th century newspapers, Gujarati newspapers, is a library in Otago in New Zealand. Can you believe it?
But God.
Again, but they only have one issue of 5 different newspapers, all neatly folded up. I think it was, what do you say, a package, you sort of, wrap things in newspapers. So they have this, 5 different newspapers from Bombay, all neatly preserved with as if they have been wrapped up to cover something very valuable. And finally, they found a way to Otago in New Zealand. And so you have one issue of just those newspapers sitting in New Zealand. But that's the only time I've actually seen 19th century newspapers from those issues. I mean, if you go to Surat, I've been to Surat many times, and they tell me that each time the flood comes, for example, I mean, each time the flood comes, it takes away some more. So there it is.
That is true. Surat has been very badly affected, but Bombay hasn't, and nor have some of the other older cities in Maharashtra, the Maharashtra area. Pune, what about Pune? What about Bori? Have you checked? Mandarkar Oriental.
Bori has a very good archive, but no, not newspapers. I mean, for some reason, newspapers were not really fashionable to preserve in many. I mean, they were fashionable until the 60s, but after that, no longer. So, but they have some Marathi newspapers. Bharat Itihas Sanshodak Mandal has got a few Marathi newspapers. But again, they're just, examples. I mean, you can't really work with them. There's not a whole series of newspapers from the start to the finish where you can actually see a trajectory, because, newspapers are very dangerous things to use. I mean, you read one article and then you say that, oh, this is what it said. But then you read the next article, they may contradict themselves. Then you realize that they are part of one party which is trying to, rubbish another party. So you really have to be careful with newspapers. Unless you have a full run, you can't do much with them. For example, English newspapers, there are quite a few. So I don't know.
Mayor has said something again.
Yeah, Billimora Library had many books in Gujarati. I hope they still have it.
I know.
I don't know
these are the sort of things that are happening. So your print museum is your priority, and I think
absolutely, yeah.
I know you've been talking to me about it for a long time. I think you need to meet Kerman Daruwala, and we are hoping to create a Zoroastrian a cultural center, Parsi Zoroastrian, not Zoroastrian religion, but a Parsi Zoroastrian cultural center at TIS Bombay. And if that happens, we will have the space to also have a small sort of setup where we can have exhibitions, and we can, of course, keep some of the very, very important things which researchers under you or people who are interested in print history would be able to come and have a look, at least at the archives and at least at the digitized versions of these old newspapers.
Fantastic.
So that is one hope which I'm appealing to everybody in the audience. Please help us to create this. It's high time, as Marazban Zaiwala said, that we do have some archive before we all disappear. But I think our Parsi Gujarati literature and our printing presses history is very safe with Murali. And I thank you so much, Murali, for a wonderful talk. It was really spectacular. And of course, we are going to have you back for the 200th anniversary of the oldest surviving newspaper in India. Thank you.
I think you'll have me back before, because I'm doing a book from Gujarati to English, which will hopefully come out early next year. So details, you'll have to wait for it. But I think that's something which all Parsis will be interested in.
Oh, that's very interesting. And if you have more fights in it, they'll buy it faster.
It's only fights. It's only fights. It's nothing else at all.
That's typical. That's typical. That's typical.
I think it'll appeal to quite a lot of people in the Parsi community.
Thank you. And I hope in the printing community also, and in the academic community, we need everybody's help and everybody's support. Thank you, Murali. It was wonderful. And I really don't know where 1 hour has gone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shahnaz. It was wonderful to speak to everybody here. My first talk, and thanks to you, it happened. Thank you so much.
Not at all. You're welcome. Come again soon. Thank you. All those of you who've been requesting a WhatsApp group, could you just please look at what has been printed, typed into the chat box by Mahtab Irani, who's handling the Parzor Foundation website. Okay, somebody says their question has not been answered. Is there any question that I've missed because I'm on my phone now? Mahtab, can you just help me out, please?
No, that I don't see that.
Okay, I'm sorry. I have lost my connection on my computer, so I'm on my phone.
If a person could raise their hand,
could you raise your hand, please? Whoever sent me a question, so that I can't see any.
I can't see any questions myself.
Yeah.
Okay. In any case, all those of you who want a WhatsApp group, Mahtab, can you just explain what we need to do and what we are planning to do?
Yes. Oh, okay. It's Farha who has raised her hand, and I will allow you to. Oh, I'm just unmuting you. But before that, if I could just let the audience know, thank you for your feedback, and we will, for the time being, we have a WhatsApp broadcast list where we circulate every Friday forums advertisement. We are working towards setting up a Telegram group, which will allow us for more than 250 people. We'll be in touch about that. Thank you.
Murali, there's a question, please.
Yeah, go ahead. I can't see it.
Farha, can you unmute, please? Hi, Farha. Can you unmute?
Hello.
Yeah, hi.
Good evening. Hi, this is Farah speaking. I would like to know which was the first language newspaper which was published in Hindustan.
First language as in any language of India or any Indian
The
language?
first language, the first language which was printed in Hindustan.
See now printed. Okay, printed. Since you use printed, I think it's easier. I mean, that's the Hickey's Gazette was printed in 1780 from Calcutta, from the
Which
jail in
language?
Calcutta, in English. Hickey's Gazette in English. So that was the first printed newspaper of Hindustan or India. But of course, India has a very long tradition of newspapers.
Was it called Hindustan in 1798? Hindustan was called Hindustan in 1798.
See, I mean, now we are going to a different trajectory. For example, sitting in Maharashtra, the Marathas would say when they go to Uttar Pradesh, we are going to Hindustan in the 17th century, in the 18th century. So if you see the Maratha records, they would say, we are going to Hindustan to conquer so and so, whatever, so and so. So Hindustan was a very nebulous term used differently by different people in the 18th century.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Manaz has a question. Could you please unmute?
Manaz, can you give us your question, please?
Hi, I just wanted to thank you all. Because of you all, I get to learn so much about all these interesting heritage topics, and especially this print. It was not very fascinating for me, but yet after listening to Murali and listening to Shahnaz and listening to all of you, I'm also very interested. And first, when I used to see all old discarded newspapers of the past, I would not cherish it or treasure it. Now, when I come across any of these old ancestral property heirlooms and leftovers, yes, of course, I'll make it a point to, treasure it and reach it out to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Manaz. That's very heartening to hear. Thank you, Murali, for getting someone.
Yeah, even one convert is good enough.
I think there's some other questions. Sorry, Murali, we're not letting you go.
No worries. I'm happy to answer.
Mahtab, because I can't see on my phone. Please.
No more questions yet. Anyone else? Please raise your hand. And
I would just like to read Ramu Ramanathan's comment. He's got an update on what happened to the Pune Museum. I think it's gone off somewhere. So since we talked about the Pune Museum, he's written here. The Ravi Joshi and Pune Press Owners Association were planning the print museum. This is from Ramu Ramanathan. They are a 100-year-old print association. They have an office which is located at Karve Road, plus a print consumables depot. But COVID situation seems to have jeopardized the plans. Things are very grim for ink on paper.
Yes. That's why we need the museum, because if the West can preserve, and if New Zealand can preserve Parsi newspapers, I'm sure we can. I'm sure we can. Yeah. Anyway, thank you for that information, Ramu. And thank you, Manaz. You've really made, I think, Murali and my day. And please, all of you here, do listen to our appeal, because we are fighting very hard to preserve this extremely interesting multicultural heritage, which obviously you have seen from Murali's talk, covers Urdu, all sorts of languages, Persian, Avasta, Gujarati, English, Marathi. So I think it's a very important integrating factor also in today's India. Thank you so much. Thank you, Murali.
Thank
Before
you.
before you miss your dinner, you better run away.
All right.
Thank you
so
so
much.
much.
Thank you so
God
much.
bless.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Do meet
Thank
us
you.
again. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.